This is going to sound really crass, but the noughties were a decade of change. There, I've said it. I promise not to do it again. Even so, the railway you're looking at in 2010 is very different from the one that existed on the 1st of January 2000, whether passenger or freight, loco-hauled or unit-based. Why is that? Well, for one thing, there's been a huge upheaval in the passenger franchises in the past 10 years, with some sections of the network enjoying, if that's the right word, 2 or 3 different franchise holders. On the freight front, we've seen new operators emerge and the steady erosion of the former EWS monopoly. At the same time, we've watched many of our favourite locomotive classes disappear, several of which we've covered in detail in the Fadeaway series. In the next 90 minutes we'll be tackling all these subjects and, we hope, jogging your memory about events long forgotten or perhaps overlooked at the time. We begin with the passenger franchises as they existed in the early years of the decade. A section we've imaginatively entitled Virgin is number 1. Well, they think so. In 2000, the company was running both the West Coast and the cross-country franchises. Loco-wise, its remaining Class 86s stood at 21. But there were all 35 of the rather lovely Class 87Os, which, unlike the 86s, operated only on the West Coast. 15 Class 90s were also allocated to West Coast services, but replacements for the whole loco fleet were already being built. The 86s lasted with Virgin until 2003, the 90s a year longer, and the 87s until 2005. A selection of much sought after HST sets operated on some Euston Holyhead services, but they were mostly to be found on the cross-country routes. The XC is best remembered at this time for the Class 47 hauled lightweight workings. 29 47-8s were allocated as the new decade began, but they only lasted on this work until 2002. When the 2-year cascade of Voyager units was completed. On the West Coast, 53 Italian-designed Pendolinos saw off the Virgin Loco fleet between July 2002 and 2005, and with the Voyagers set a new standard in railway comfort. Absolutely none at all. Virgin also introduced a passenger variant of the Class 57 conversion for rescues and drag work. The first one appeared in June 2002, and the Thunderbirds eventually numbered 16. Meanwhile, on the giant tramway, as Northerners insist on calling it, the southeastern section of the former southern region was still reliant on 40-year-old Kent Coast units. By the end of the decade, the ancient Class 411s inherited by Connex and the rest of the slam door units would be eliminated. Connex lost the southeastern franchise in November 2003 after, quote, a loss of confidence in the company by the Strategic Rail Authority, which set up a wholly owned replacement by the name of Southeastern Trains. A third franchise holder, Go Via, took it over in 2006 and still uses the same name today. Connex also ran South Central in 2000, formerly known as the Brighton Lines, and the fleet included these horrid things. Class 205 diesel-electric units, which operated on the Uckfield route until December 2004. which was longer than Connex itself lasted. The SRA relieved the company of the Central franchise in October 2000. Govia snapped up this one too, rebranded it as Southern, and reintroduced a splash of the correct colour to the coaching stock. The Stagecoach Bus Company picked up the South West franchise at privatisation, and later won a 15-year extension, so still around in 2010. Part of its inheritance were 62 4-VEP units, but as a condition of the extension, they were all phased out in the year up to March 2005. Stagecoach's Isle of Wight line merged with South West Trains in 2007, but not much else happened, apart from this unit getting repainted into its original London Transport red. Before we leave the Southern, we should also mention the Juniper units. Introduced with only partial success on Gatwick Express services from 2000. 8 of them replaced the long-standing Class 73 push-pull trains. Govia took over the Gatwicks from National Express in 2008. Until 2006, Govia's Thameslink service used dual-voltage Class 319s between Bedford and Brighton, but this franchise is now part of First Capital Connect. Mention of Bedford diverts us onto the Midland Main Line, where National Express operates a franchise of the same name. VP 185 engine HSTs are the staple motive power here. 17 Class 170 Turbo Stars were introduced from 1998, doubling the number of services. These Derby-built units lasted until 2004, when enough Class 222s were available to take over. In 2003-04, MML ran Project Rio services between St Pancras and Manchester to reduce congestion on the west coast while the decorators were in. A new corporate image coincided. Central trains, also operated by National Express, covered a huge area of the Midlands. By 2000, all the slam door units had gone, but 36 of these old 158 sets soldiered on. Central also had 20 Class 156s, but they were phased out when Turbo Stars became available. 33 of them have been acquired by the year 2000. Northern Spirit, run by MTL, only just made it into the new millennium. Arriva Trains took over this franchise in February 2000, deploying 158s on the longer distance journeys. The despised Class 142 Pacers were thankfully used on the short distance routes. Still, I hear they're very popular in Iran, where some have now emigrated. One of the most popular of the surviving loco-haul trains was the Class 37 operated Fort William Sleeper. A bit of a dog's breakfast, it's true. Run by National Express's ScotRail with Caledonian Sleeper branding and locos supplied by EWS. These 3 portions of the ScotRail Sleeper combined when they reached Glasgow and worked south to London Euston behind a dedicated fleet of 5 EWS Class 90s. Another mecca for 37 fans in 2000 was the North Wales coast, but only for another year. First North Western's loco-haul trains were replaced by Class 175 Coradia units, another troublesome beast. But a loco-haul service returned in 2003 when FNW hired in 47s from Riviera for a Birmingham to Holyhead train. At the other end of Wales, Prism Rail's Valley Lines franchise introduced 37s on Rumney commuter trains. They remained even after the creation of National Express's Wales and Borders franchise in 2001, and also survived the creation of Arriva Trains Wales in late 2003. The ever-popular Thrash Up the Valley finally ended early in 2006. Wales and Borders also ran a loco service from Cardiff to Fishguard, also until 2006, using both the 50 funds machinery as well as the mandatory 37. Virgin's old coaches provided the seat. When the decade began, First Great Western was already onto its second livery, the original ivory and green Merlin livery with gold stripes stuck over the ivory. Fag packet livery, some called it. Non-smokers merely said, "Oh, that's rather attractive." At this time, the power car still had Valenta engines, which laid the customary smoke trails over the postal dock on departure from Paddington. First Great Western also had 6 47-8s for its loco-haul trains, like the Paddington Penzance Sleeper, but there were also normal trains during the day in the early years of the Noughties. In 2001, Porterbrook's experiments with the ETH-fitted 57601 led to an order for 4 Class 57-6 replacements, all of which have proved just as reliable as the 47-8s they replaced. First Group became bored with its colours again in 2002 and decided to repaint everything in the awful Barbie doll livery. Of course, this is nothing like Barbie at all, although I do hear that Ken writes a bit of pink lippy in his off-duty moments. That's Barbie's Ken, by the way, not our producer. Wessex Trains was created in 2001 to take over some of the Wales and West local routes operated by National Express. Numerically, the largest group of its units were these Class 150s. Go Ahead, rather than Go Via, ran the Thames Trains franchise with Class 165 and 166 DMUs. First Group snaffled up these workings in 2004 and rebranded them as First Great Western Link. Since privatisation, the East Coast Mainline franchise had been operated by Sea Containers, branded as GNER. 31 Class 91s formed the backbone of these services. But there were also 9 HST sets for services running off the Deuce north of Edinburgh. Between 2000 and 2005, the fleet was augmented by spare Eurostar sets between King's Cross and Leeds. In East Anglia, First Great Eastern had control of the London commuter services. 24 Class 312 EMUs could be found at the start of the decade, but they were all gone by 2004. The core fleet then comprised 77 Class 321s and 43 Class 315s. "21 Class 360 sets entered service between 2003 and 2004, replacing the 312s. First Group lost this franchise to National Express in April 2004. The Norwich to Liverpool Street services were operated by GB Railways under the Anglia Railways banner in 2000, using 15 Class 86s and 12 Turbostars. When National Express took over the main line and the commuter franchises, the whole lot became one. And one shall be its name. By 2005, the 86s had been replaced by 15 Class 90s cascaded from Virgin West Coast, along with the coaching stock and the driving trailers. And this rather lovely livery resulted, giving the Great Eastern the look of a modern railway at last. Unfortunately, it didn't last. Let's slacken the pace a little and take a look at the various meanderings of the Network Rail trains. We should of course be looking at Railtrack here, but the first infrastructure provider became another casualty of government intervention in 2002 for, well, being useless really. NR's operations create a great deal of interest amongst enthusiasts because its fleet is so varied. Here, for instance, is a Metro Camel Class 101 DMU doing a spot of track measuring at Stenson Junction. This track assessment unit, purpose-built in 1987, is based on the Class 150 design and goes by the name of Class 950. Like most NR stock, all over yellow is the compulsory colour. The creation of the new measurement train caused a bit of a stir in 2003 because it looked uncannily like an HST set. Perhaps because it was. The train is used to measure contacts between rail and wheel and can also take laser readings of the height and cant of overhead lines. It's also a giant video camera. Here the train is being used to test Power Car 43089. In 2007, the Brushworks fitted it with Hitachi's diesel battery hybrid power system, provoking the nickname Duracell Bunny. The power car returned to normal passenger work in 2008 and was one of the last to retain the Valenta engine, until it blew up in October 2009. In February 2007, NR took delivery of 5 DBSOs, so it could dispense with using a loco at both ends. One of 4 Class 31s operated by Network Rail provides the power for this test train. The Serco manned test trains are contracted in by the infrastructure company and always throw up plenty of traction variety. Between 2004 and 2006, EWS provided Class 67s for some workings. DRS stepped in as a traction provider in 2006. In fact, DRS locos now power the majority of these workings, although the ones running over the former southern region are operated by GB Rail Freight. Physical contact with overhead lines to test the power supply itself is provided by the 1973 test coach Mentor. 31106 is leased to Network Rail by its owner Howard Johnston. In a change to standard practice, the loco runs in the correct rail blue, at the owner's insistence. Finally, the latest addition to the NR fleet, 4 Class 37s which work on the Cambrian Line's pilot project for the ERTMS signalling scheme. Mail, or post, has been carried by rail since 1830. True, the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. In fact, the Railways Conveyance of Mails Act of 1838 required all railway companies to carry the post, either by ordinary or special trains, as demanded by the Government Postmaster General. 170 odd years of history pretty much went in the bin in 2004 when Royal Mail cancelled EWS's postal contract and decided to use planes and trucks instead. At the start of the decade, however, all was well on the postal trains, with more than 50 Class 47s comprising the diesel fleet allocated to the work by EWS. A small fleet of Class 90s complemented the diesels. Although electric power was mostly deployed on the Anglo-Scottish trains serving the giant mail terminals at Willesden and Shieldmuir. A purpose-built fleet of 16 Class 325 EMUs was also used between London and Glasgow or Edinburgh. The certainty that this work would last forever encouraged EWS to order 30 Alstom Prima locomotives at the end of the old century. The first of these 125 mile-an-hour units entered traffic in 2000 after construction under licence from General Motors at Alstom's plant in Spain. The arrival of the 67s brought about a dramatic decrease in the number of 47s on mail services. The travelling post offices, with on-board sorting of mail and parcels, could also be traced back to 1838, although the first one was a converted horse box. Even so, the TPO was the first to go, in January 2004, following the Royal Mail's discovery of flight. The final night of TPO operation was the 9th of January, 166 years after the first one had run. A severe blow, not just to history, but to EWS, who'd invested heavily in the dedicated 67 fleet. However, there's always one of those. That wasn't the end of operations network-wide. The following Christmas, GB Rail Freight was awarded a contract to shift Anglo-Scottish mail, but on a very limited level. The Christmas mail trains brought the brief reinstatement of some Class 87s, which were used to haul the recalcitrant 325 units. Eventually, GBRF persuaded some of them to work, and they resumed a daily service. However, there's another one. In 2009, DB Schenker, the new owner of EWS, won back this work, So what happens next is anyone's guess. To save me writing any script, this shot pretty much shows you what EWS was using in 2000. At the start of the decade, 187 of the General Motors Class 66s had been delivered. The remaining 63 arrived over the next 6 months. Competition and the general downturn in business meant that the original EWS plan for a core fleet of 250 66s, all the 58s and 60s, 50 Class 56s and 137s, was already looking distinctly unlikely. Because of this rationalisation, by the end of 2000, the 250-strong fleet of 66s could turn up almost anywhere. And almost anywhere they did. The 58s were the first complete class to be eliminated in the decade, despite the fact they were the most reliable of EWS's ageing fleet. The end was swift. The last one fell off the home radar in September 2002, although 3 moved to Holland, and there have been further exports to Spain and France. In fact, as 2009 drew to a close, no fewer than 24 were working in France on the construction of another high-speed line. EWS's loss, Europe's gain. 85 56s entered the new century, helped in no small part by the decline of the 58s. But the reprieve was only temporary. A steady stream of withdrawals ensued until they re-eliminated 2 by March 2004. 30 later worked in France on TGV line construction, but as you'll see later, that wasn't the end of their story. The 100-strong fleet of Class 60s remained intact at the start of 2000, as they were the traction of choice for the heaviest trains. But in late 2003, EWS changed its policy regarding these locos, and they started going in and out of store on a regular basis. By the end of 2004, up to 50% of the fleet could be out of traffic on any given day. There was also the touchy subject of general overhauls, as all of them were more than 10 years old by this time. At the start of the decade, EWS also had 132 Class 37s on its books, although 42 of them were in France. By the end of 2000, fewer than 60 remained, but their ranks nudged back over 60 in 2002 and hovered around that mark until the end of 2004. The survivors were a fairly even cross-section of the various subclasses, and their duties remained as varied as ever. Of the EWS Class 92 fleet, 25 were allocated to feeder services on the east and west coast to Dollars Moor. Another 14 ran exclusively through the Channel Tunnel to Freighton Yard in Calais. The remaining 7 members of the class went into store at Crewe in 2000. They were once owned by Eurostar, but no buyer came forward when they were offered for sale, until 2007, when Europort 2 made a successful offer and began refurbishing them. All are to be fitted with French signalling equipment, so the type can work beyond Calais at last, a development almost 20 years overdue. Freightliner had been around as a separate entity for almost 40 years, so it remained a big freight operator in the new decade. Despite the class's general decline, there were still 40 Class 47s on the books in 2000. And 30 of the Class 86-6 conversions. In 2000, the unique 86501 was created and added to the Freightliner fleet. Refer to AC fadeaway for extra gen. The company also had 10 Class 90s operating alongside the 86s on the electrified trunk routes. By the beginning of 2000, 8 of 12 Class 57 conversions had already been delivered to Freightliner. Known as body snatchers because they stole their physical form from Class 47s, these locos differed in having General Motors engines and brush alternators. Unfounded optimism for the Class 57s brought about a virtual halving of Freightliner's 47 stable by 2001. The company's expansion plans created the requirement for even more new locos. Initially, 5 66s had arrived in 1999, but they were joined by another 94 by the end of 2004. Freightliner had not only secured Network Rail ballast work, but had also begun running coal trains, in addition to the core business of boxes. The new intake of GM power included the 66-6 variants, with modified gearing to produce greater tractive effort at low speed. Of course, the maximum speed suffered as a result. At privatisation, DRS had become the designated operator of nuclear waste trains, although wresting all the work away from EWS took 2 years. DRS's use of heritage traction on these trains made fuel rods a hot topic with enthusiasts. After starting out with Class 20s, the company soon acquired 6 of the former Nightstar 37.6s, as well as other 37 variants and 33s and 47s by the year 2002. A desired move into the intermodal business was realised in 2001 when pairs of 37s began running between Moss End and the Daventry terminal on behalf of W.H. Malcolm. DRS also joined the queue for 66s. 10 were delivered in 2003 to help out with the growing intermodal business. The growth of these services has been largely based on transporting domestic containers rather than the deep sea traffic in which Freightliner specialises. The first new freight company of the decade was GB Rail Freight, which had won a Network Rail contract to transport ballast. As a result, 7 more Canadians touched down on British track in 2001. GBRF also moved into the intermodal market, calling for 5 more 66s in 2002. Further intermodal flows and more Network Rail work propelled the company's 66 fleet to 17 by the end of 2004. And that was only the beginning. Privatisation also encouraged a number of small companies to set up shop to provide spot hire locos to the main franchise holders. Fragonset was an early success story. Set up in 1997, it had 31s, 33s, 47s and 73s available for rent, and some will tell you, kept the VXC network operating for something like 5 years with its ubiquitous black duffs. Here's one now. As well as the charters and the almost permanent encampment of Birmingham New Street for Virgin, Fragonset's customers included Wales and Borders, Wessex Trains and First North Western. Freightliner also needed Fragonset's help occasionally. A merger with Merlin Rail resulted in the creation of FM Rail in 2005, followed by the purchase of Hertfordshire Rail Tours and the assets of Pathfinder Tours. That's when it all went wrong. FM not only faced competition from other spot hire companies, but a much better utilisation of assets by its customers. Business conditions became difficult and the company was put into administration in 2006. Another new company, Nemesis Rail, arose from the ashes in 2007, but with only a small number of the former fleet. It continued in the spot hire business on a reduced scale, as well as refurbishing coaches. Cotswold Rail entered the spot hire market in 2003 with a small fleet of 47s. The locos were painted in a corporate silver livery and mainly found employment on stock moves. Cotswold also provided standby locos for the One franchise in East Anglia. In 2005, the company acquired its first 87, with plans for a spot hire fleet of 10. But that didn't work out either, and the 87s went back to Porterbrook in 2006. Cotswold also set up a freight company, more of which later. The West Coast Railway Company is a spot hire outfit with a difference. It also has a train operating licence, which means it can run its own charters, notably the summer-long Jacobite steam specials between Fort William and Mallaig. There's a wide range of traction in the fleet, including 57601, acquired in 2004, which regularly appears on rail tours. By 2005, WCRC had 4 operational 47s in its fleet. The rolling stock is a mixture of Mark 1s and Mark 2s. In 2004, it acquired 4 37s from Ian Riley Engineering, which ceased its own spot hire business at the same time. However, the 2 pictured here were swapped with DRS for a quartet of Class 33s in 2005. In 2007 acquisitions included 5 47-7s from EWS. 3 have since re-entered traffic, with the other 2 expected to follow soon. Four of the 737s bought the same year have also gone back to work. Two of the former DRS 33s have returned to traffic alongside them. A third is currently awaiting OTMR fitment, and the fourth is providing spares. A cynic might say that the only people to become truly rich from the railway in the noughties were the paint companies. Here's a selection of shots to back up that theory. In the early years, Virgin were at the forefront with the paintbrush. 86-228 shows off a recent application of intercity livery. 87-002 was outshot in the Porterbrook purple. While 87-012 became blessed with the NSE clown colours to promote London's Olympic bid. A selection of 47s went retro to mark the end of loco haulage on cross-country services. 47-851 returned to green. (47-853) went back into the XP64 livery it carried in 1964. (47-840), the famous North Star, reacquired standard rail blue. While 47-847 reacquainted itself with large logo. 47-826 reverted to intercity. And 47-829, bizarrely, began promoting the plod. Proving that a sense of humour had survived privatisation, Fragonset repainted 31601 pink for Wessex Railways. Slightly more serious, GBRF applied Medici Black to 66709 to demonstrate its commitment to the shipping company. Not to be outdone, EWS restores 37411 to green for its swan song on the Rumley commuters. Two Class 60s went into silver with chorus branding. And after DB Schenker's takeover of EWS, 60074 acquired a light blue special livery to promote the Teenage Cancer Trust. Closely followed by 60040 to encourage people to join the Territorial Army and be sent to Afghanistan. The French began running high-speed TGV trains in 1981, but it took Chaos Island a little longer to get its act together. The Channel Tunnel may have called Eurostar trains into existence in 1994, but they had to trundle through the Kent countryside on existing lines. Until September 2003, when the first 46 miles of a genuine high-speed link to London were opened. This allowed the Eurostars to run at their top speed of 186 miles an hour in this country for the first time, and aping the French again, a British land speed record of 208 miles an hour was set just before the line opened to the Gen pub. Even so, the trains were still using London Waterloo as their terminus at this time, which meant completing the inbound journey on the third rail. Still, 21 minutes cut from the London-Paris journey time, with more savings expected when the big hole was drilled under the Thames. The second section involved not only the link from the new Ebbsfleet station to the new Stratford station, but a complete revamp of St Pancras as the preferred terminal for high-speed travel. Personally, I liked it the way it was, dark and smelly, and redolent of a bygone railway age. The 24-mile extension to the high-speed line opened in November 2007. Overnight, Waterloo International became redundant, and St Pancras enjoyed a new dawn. With the full line open, the journey time from London to Paris came down by another 20 minutes to a staggering 2 hours 15 minutes. Or a staggering 11 hours if your train breaks down in the tunnel. To ensure the line was fully utilised, and contrary to French practice, Southeastern Trains ordered 29 Javelin dual voltage EMUs from Hitachi in Japan. They can run at up to 140 miles an hour on High Speed 1, but because they also handle DC electricity from the third rail, they can be used on services to Dover and Ramsgate, as well as the dash from London to Ashford. The new services began in December 2009, and you can now travel from Ashford to the capital in 37 minutes rather than 80 by a 30-minute interval service. So move to Ashford straight away! We left off the first passenger section with 1, so we'll pick up the story there. After taking over the Anglia Railways and the first Great Eastern operations, National Express wasted no time in rebranding everything in the paint chart colours. which kind of begs the question of where that awful grey came from later. However, as seems to be the case all over the railway in the noughties, no sooner was this work nearing completion than the company decided on another rebranding as National Express East Anglia. The franchise expires in 2011 and it's thought the bus company will lose it. Good. Noughties continued to run central trains in 2005 but was informed the franchise would end in 2007. Oh, another one gone. This Turbostar isn't in yet another central livery but something dreamed up by Porterbrook to denote its spot hire availability, which can be modified to something relevant if the hire is long term. With so many changes of franchises and movements of units between them, it's not surprising that a corporate image is never fully established. This former Northern 158, for instance, is still carrying the remnants of its old colours. And the livery issue became irrelevant anyway at the end of 2007 when Central Trains was split into 3 separate franchises. Still, more good news for the paint companies. The first trains run in the East Midlands by Stagecoach came about when the company took over Natex's Midland Main Line franchise, as well as the central services in Lincolnshire and those between Crewe and Derby. On the St Pancras Express services, 27 Class 222s continue to ply their trade. But guess what? They're now in new colours. The 222s work alongside 13 HST sets, also now rebranded. The second new franchise, created from the former Central, is operated by London Midland, primarily semi-fast trains on the West Coast Main Line. 67 Class 350 Desiros can be found on these, and very nice they are too. The other half of London Midland's operation is the local commuter traffic around the Birmingham and Coventry area. Class 170s work a number of these, and more will arrive in 2010 when the company replaces its Class 150s. The third beneficiary of the Central carve-up is the new cross-country franchise. This covers both the former Virgin franchise and some of the longer distance Central routes. Refurbished HSTs and Voyagers make up most of the fleet. Arriva holds this franchise until 2016. The loss of BXC left Virgin with only the West Coast Express franchise. Despite the wall-to-wall Pendolinos, what a joy. Loco haulage is still on the menu, with 57 3s working on the North Wales coast. And from Euston to Preston, with a hired-in Class 90 and properly designed and comfortable Mark III coaches. TransPennine Express was originally the brand name of Arriva's Northern Rail. In 2004 it became a separate franchise run by First Group. Many of the services centre on Manchester Airport and radiate out to Cumbria in the northwest and to the east coast, including Newcastle, Middlesbrough, Scarborough and Scunthorpe. By the end of the decade, 2 kinds of units formed the fleet: 9 Class 170s and 51 Class 185s. For a short time at the start of the franchise, 158s and 175s also appeared. In December 2004, Northern became Northern Rail, with Serco Group and Ned Railways taking over the franchise. At the same time, they also took over First North Western. The company works all local services in the northeast and a large number in the northwest. Its fleet is made up mainly of second-generation DMUs and a smaller fleet of EMUs. Like many franchise holders, they can't resist a bit of advertising on some of their trains. The Northern Rail arrangement is due to run until 2013. Moving on to Scotland, ScotRail became First ScotRail in 2004 when First Group replaced National Express as the franchise holder. How many is that now? First immediately set about repainting the stock in the corporate blue. Although units working in the Strathclyde Partnership for Transport area continue to carry the attractive carmine and cream reintroduced in the 1990s. Units dominate the Scottish passenger scene, as they have since the last ice age. On the diesel front, it's all 156s, 158s and 170s. Electric dominance can be explained by the numbers 314, 318, 320 and 322. In 2008, First Group abandoned the corporate emphasis and rebranded all its stock as ScotRail, Scotland's Railway, a statement of the self-evident, which also extended to the Strathclyde liveried units. It may seem incredible to old people like myself, but what was once a loco-hauled mecca is now almost barren of proper trains, unless you count a Class 67 haul commuter service around the Fife Circle. The only other loco haulage is on the sleepers. Class 67s have dominated here too since their takeover of the Fort William portion in 2006 from 37-4s. Moving southwards to the other Celtic region, we catch up with Arriva Trains Wales, which employs 27 Class 175s on some of the longer journeys like Holyhead Cardiff and Manchester to Milford Haven. Lovely. The company's 24 Class 158s operate on the Cambrian line, as well as between Cardiff and Cheltenham. This 15-year franchise runs out in 2018. Before we leave the Welsh Arriva, we should also mention the introduction in December 2008 of a daily top and tail Class 57 hauled service between Holyhead and Cardiff. In 2008, Wrexham and Shropshire began a new Class 67 hauled service between Wrexham and London Marylebone, and chose this novel way of promoting it and providing route learning to its drivers at the same time. W&S is jointly owned by Deutsche Bahn and Renaissance Trains. Initially all services were top and tail, but as soon as DVTs became available, traditional push-pull working ensued. Because of the economic downturn, service frequency was reduced from 5 to 4 trains a day in 2009. Deutsche Bahn also owns the Chiltern Railways franchise operating out of Marylebone. A first-generation Class 121 bubble car has been retained on the Aylesbury to Princes Risborough branch. Class 165s and 166s remain the norm, however. This franchise runs until 2022, but it's conditional on a number of investment promises, including the building of a new chord at Bicester to allow direct running from Marylebone to Oxford. In 2006, First Great Western expanded to take in Great Western Link and Wessex trains. Reliability issues with the 125 mph Class 180s resulted in their replacement with spare HST sets in 2008 and 9. The other major change has been the replacement of life-expired Valenta power units with the Mewtwo variant in all the HST power cars. And very quiet they are too. Interesting, FGW's new silent operation briefly surged in 2008 when a Class 67 Horde service was introduced between Cardiff and Weymouth. The final journey in September 2009, that didn't last long, was worked by Class 37s. The sole surviving slam door EMUs are operated by South West Trains on the Lymington Pier branch in Dorset, but they're expected to disappear in 2010. To celebrate the line's 150th anniversary in July 2008, the SIGs were paired up with a Class 73. SWT's fleet of Class 442s ran until 2007, when they were replaced by new Desiros on the Waterloo to Weymouth turns. However, they reappeared in December 2008 as Southern's answer to the Gatwick-Juniper dilemma. SWT doesn't like Junipers either, and has now banished them to the Waterloo-Reading route, after allegedly failing to persuade Porterbrook to take them back. This batch of 30 was introduced between 1998 and 2000, and their career has been, well, checkered. And apart from that, these are so much better. German-built Class 450 Siemens Desiros. The blue ones began to appear in 2004 and now number 127. They're used on both commuter and outer suburban services. Class 444s are the Express Desiro with an extra coach and something that's meant to be a buffet. The 45 sets mostly operate on the longer distance routes to Portsmouth and Weymouth. Meanwhile, back in the land of overhead electricity, these 313s operate inner suburban services running to King's Cross and Moorgate. This is First Capital Connect again. The franchise runs until 2015. Staying on the East Coast Main Line, Hull Trains was formed in 2001 and originally operated turbo styles between Hull and King's Cross until 2004. The 170s were replaced by Class 222s, and the number of daily trains rose from 3 to 6 by 2006. In 2008, that became 7. In 2009, Hull Trains acquired some of the displaced FGW Class 180s, whereupon the 222s moved to the East Midlands. Between January and April 2008, the company hired in the preserved 86-101 and a rake of Mark IIIs as short-term cover for a badly damaged Class 222. After early teething problems, another new company, Grand Central, began running a Valenta-powered HST service between King's Cross and Sunderland in December 2007. From early 2009, the number of daily services rose to 4 by adding 2 Class 180s to the fleet. The main East Coast operator, GNER, finally waved goodbye to its Eurostars in December 2005. 2 years later, Sea Containers lost the franchise to National Express, and a half-hearted rebranding exercise ensued, involving lovely grey on the driving ends and the red stripes on the coaches changing to white. I saw the whole team working on that one. Like FGW, GNER had begun fitting Mutu power units to its HSTs, but unlike FGW, a renumbering resulted to distinguish one type from the other. Thus, 43006 became 43206. On the 1st of July 2009, after unsuccessfully attempting to renegotiate the franchise terms, Natex announced it would be unable to continue for the full length of the franchise. And so the government stepped in again and converted National Express into Nationalised Express until another mug could be found to pay the exorbitant franchise fee. Until then, the assets of National Express East Coast are managed by a publicly owned company known simply as East Coast. Sir Nigel Gresley must be turning in his grave. Like the Network Rail workings, the railhead treatment trains create much interest in the run-up to Christmas. Not that the festive season has much to do with it. In 2003, a number of 37s were reinstated by EWS for this work. A year later, 37s were out in force again, after even more leaves fell from the same trees. More surprising was the use of Class 67s, as their long search for new work continued after the loss of the Royal Mail contract. The use of large numbers of 37s brought the class back on a daily basis to old haunts, like the North Wales coast. And to some unusual locations like Wellingborough. DRS joined the fray in 2006 when 47839 was hired to move RHTT wagons to Kingmore in preparation for the forthcoming leaf fall. DRS's involvement hiked up the interest still further, not least when Class 20s appeared at Manningtree in 2007. Working alongside newly acquired Class 57s, which had passed this way before. DRS operated so many of these trains that it even rostered Class 66s to them. Colas Rail won the contract for RHTTs in the southwest in 2007 and promptly unveiled a pair of refurbished 47s in startling new colours. However, EWS didn't lose all this work, although the decision to use 66s to power water jets showed how much the company's normal freight traffic had declined. .37s continue to appear, thanks to DRS's chunk of the contract. DRS 47s began to turn up too. By 2009, EWS, or more correctly DB Schenker, had recovered the North Wales trains from DRS as part of a drive to win back lost traffic. What changes the 2010 season will bring, only time will tell. We begin with an old chestnut, the VSOE, which continued to run regularly throughout the decade, usually with Class 47s and latterly 67s. Another luxury train running throughout the Noughties was the Royal Scotsman, promoted by Orient Express Hotels, no relation. The only change was the motive power provider, a switch from EWS to West Coast Railways in 2005. The much vaunted Blue Pullman was introduced by FM Rail under the Hertfordshire Rail Tours banner in 2006. After FM went into administration, it passed to Cotswold Rail. Hertfordshire Rail Tours was sold on to Victor Rail Link, who sold it on again to Eddie Stobart, who then rebranded the company as Stobart Pullman and relaunched a Pullman train in 2008. Yes, it does sound a bit like a soap opera plot. Another luxury train in an already overcrowded market proved to be a bad idea, and the venture lasted only a few months before lack of bookings brought about its suspension. When it did run, DRS handled the operation and provided the locos. Another honourable mention as a decade-long promoter goes to the SRPS, which continued with its highly popular tours through the Scottish countryside, and often beyond. Pastime Rail almost makes the list too, but its charter promoting days came to an end in the summer of 2009 when it became another railway company to go into administration. North East Rail Tours ran the occasional trip in conjunction with the SRPS. Rail Tourer specialises in land cruise style charters, i.e. upmarket-ish with dining, and on this occasion used West Coast Railways motive power. A welcome new promoter in 2008 was Spitfire Tours, which not only uses heritage traction on its charters, but also does its best to keep ticket prices low. When John Farrow sold his long-standing Hertfordshire Rail Tours business to FM in 2005, he was retained as a consultant, but he's now come full circle with a return to full-time promotion under the UK Rail Tours banner, which we understand is doing rather well. The other very long-standing player, Pathfinder, was sold to Riviera Trains in 2006, but we're pleased to say the ineffable Pete Watts is still heavily involved. Mention of Pete and Pathfinder makes this the perfect point to consider the heritage traction running on the main line, primarily on rail tours, starting with the Class 46 Ixion. This groundbreaking loco was painted into rail blue in February 2002, but its mainline career continued for only a couple more years. The Class 40 Preservation Society's 4145 returned to mainline action in November 2002. The Class 50 Alliance ran 3 different Class 50s on the main line during the noughties, while 55022 made its second and third comebacks in the decade. This is the first run of its third comeback, or fourth mainline career, I lose count, complete with a Napier Marine engine. Three other Deltics also strutted their stuff, including the Deltic Preservation Society's D9009. If you were quick, you could also have corksed the DPS's 55019 and, always the bridesmaid, D9016. 45112 made sporadic appearances on the main line between 2003 and 2007. It's scheduled to return in 2010. Even preserved AC electrics are coming back, like the privately owned 86259. The first private AC to return was the AC Loco Group's 86101 in 2007. The group's Class 87002 came back in 2008 after hardly being away. But arguably the most notable returnee of the decade was the Diesel Traction Group's Western D1015 in 2002. Yes, it really was 8 years ago. Even more new freight operators appeared in the second half of the decade. After acquiring 3 Class 56s in 2005, Fastline Freight began driver training in readiness for a new intermodal flow from Doncaster to the Isle of Grain in 2006. With so many players at the table, the service struggled for business in the economic downturn, and it was suspended in March 2009. On a more positive note, Fastline took delivery of 566s in 2008 to work coal contracts serving Ratcliffe, Cottam and Ironbridge power stations. Colas, which began in 2007 with the West Country RHTT trains, soon expanded into other traffic. One such working was the Dollensmore to Burton steel train, which it pinched from DB Schenker in March 2009. In November 2008, the company had run an Immingham to Washwood Heath steel train using Hanson Traction-owned Class 56s. One of them was the bizarre-looking 56312 Artemis. Another new service in 2009 was a Dollensmore to Hams Hall intermodal on behalf of Norfolk Line. Hanson 56s are the rostered power here too. Colas was also signed up to move Class 87s from Long Marston to Crewe on the first leg of their journey to Bulgaria. The 87's not Colas. In the consist of this one is the AC Loco Group's 86401, which may well return to traffic itself at some point. Before we leave Colas, we must include this shot of the Dollensmore steel taken in September 2009, with two Riviera Blue 47s up front. Plus ça change, plus que la même chose, as the French would have it. In 2008, Cotswolds set up Advenza Freight, initially deploying Class 47s and 57s on scrap trains. In May 2009, the company took two Class 66s on lease and began running a fly ash service with them a month later. However, by October, the company was being wound up in the High Court. The long-running church logs, because everybody needs wood laminate flooring, ran until early 2009 as Amex Spy's only mainline train, using a hired-in Virgin 57 as motive power. Then Colas took over AMEC and the working, and it can now produce either Virgin 57s or Arriva Trains West 57s or Colas's own 47s. DRS began a new intermodal flow from Ditton to Purfleet in 2005 using a pair of 37s. At the time, the company had lent two of its 66s to Freightliner, hence the use of heritage traction. It didn't last long, only until April 2006. The following September, DRS launched its highest profile train, the Tesco Express. Launched in conjunction with Eddie Stobart, the train received a dedicated loco, 66411, with appropriate branding and the name Eddie the Engine. But that didn't last either. In 2009, DB Schenker stepped in, which must have been a bit of a blow because the year before, DRS had taken delivery of more 66s, lifting its fleet total to 34. Not surprisingly, it soon returned the first 10 to the leasing company, with the incredibly good excuse that they weren't the latest low-emission type. 37423 was one of the locos involved in the Class 33 swap with West Coast mentioned earlier, and its ETH capability has proved useful on the frequent pairings with the Saloon Caroline. Freightliner's expansion continued, and despite the arrival of regular batches of 66s, the 57Os clung on to their box work until 2007. The final batch of 66s in November 2008 brought Freightliner's new GM fleet to 137 locos. In 2007, the company also began operating in Poland. 7 locos were specially built for this work, but they've since been joined by 5 of Freightliner's British fleet. Tout ça change past deux. As the decade closed, Freightliner was still operating a fleet of 21 Class 86s. The big recent development, though, was the announcement in 2007 of Project Genesis, centering on the production of Class 70 locomotives in the United States by General Electric. The first 2 arrived in November 2009, and initial service runs have seen them working coal from Portway to Rugeley, as well as intermodals from Lawley Street to Felixstowe. 4 more arrived in December 2009, and another 6 are due in September 2010. All this competition was clearly bad news for EWS. Following the restructuring exercise in 2006, about which the less said the better, the company was bought by Deutsche Bahn in 2007. Although the EWS identity remained initially, the whole of DB's freight operations Europe-wide was rebranded as DB Schenker in January 2009. On the motive power front in Britain, DBS ended the decade with 30 Class 92s. while the 30 Class 67s were still trying to find work, with several on hire to other operators. The Class 60s briefly came back into favour with tentative plans to refurbish the fleet, but the recession killed off that idea, and the survivors, what's left of them, continue to go in and out of store on a regular basis. By the end of the decade, the number of 60s in service each day was often in single figures. The DBS rebranding exercise has resulted in a few locos receiving a new corporate livery, such as 66152. Plus ça change, part 3. A handful of 37s remain on active service, like 37425 and 401 on this Holyhead to Warrington train in October 2009. In the second half of the decade, GB Rail Freight continued to receive batches of 66s. In 2006, 5 arrived in this Metrolink branded livery, primarily for use on a contract for London Underground. But the Metros have also appeared on a variety of other GBRF trains. 5 more GMs turned up in 2006, and these, along with a further batch of 5 in 2008, appeared in a new first group livery. The GBRF 66 fleet now stands at 32. The extra locos were largely to provide traction for coal contracts won by the company. Before we go, we should also mention GB's small fleet of Class 73s used on network rail contracts, and the occasional really cranky rail tour. We round off though with another plus ça change. In 2009, GB Rail Freight won a contract to deliver new tube stock to Ruislip Underground Depot. Surprisingly, the company decided to hire in privately owned Class 20s for these moves, a design which is now entering its 7th decade of operation on the British network. So on second thoughts, ignore everything I've said for the past 90 minutes. It's still the same railway.